I'm going to welcome onto stage a few panellists to join me for this conversation. Our first guest is Annette Verschuren. She's the Chair and CEO of NRStor, which is an energy storage development company. She was formerly the President of Home Depot Canada and oversaw the growth from 19 stores to 179 stores during her role heading Asia Pacific, including the entry into China. She's also the president and co-owner of Michaels of Canada, the country's largest chain of arts and crafts stores. She began her career with the Cape Breton Development Corporation, a coal mining operation in Nova Scotia. Please welcome Annette. Hi, lovely to have you. Next up, we have Boris von Bormann. He's the former CEO for Mercedes-Benz energy manufacturer and stationary storage systems for the utility, commercial and residential sectors. Additionally, Boris has ownership in SK Solar, a residential and commercial solar installation and engineering company. Prior to opening that, he was CEO for Sonnen, which is the pioneer and manufacturer of energy storage solutions. In 2012, he also founded Accessio, which is an independent consulting company focused on cross-cultural business practices. Please welcome Boris. Hey, good to have you. Next up, we have Gianna. She's the president and CEO of ENMAX Corporation and has nearly 3 decades of experience in the energy industry. She spent the first part of her career in the gas pipeline business in Houston, Texas, before transitioning to the electricity industry. Gianna has experience in a number of electricity markets across the UK, Europe, and Alberta. Gianna currently serves as a member of the board of directors for United Way of Calgary and Area Kiera Corp, and the Canadian Electricity Association. Please welcome Gianna. Hey. Lovely to have you. And our final panellist for this session, Dave Martin, is the Managing Director and co-founder of Powerledger, a leading blockchain energy trading platform. He has nearly 20 years of experience in the electricity industry and has held executive positions in 2 state-owned electricity utilities. David spent the past 6 years as a senior consultant to industry participants, specialising in the regulation of distributed networks. David is passionate about the development of low-carbon electricity systems focused on the needs of all consumers. Please welcome Dave. Hey, Dave. I know, good to have a fellow Aussie, not only that, a West Aussie. Go figure. Well, listen, guys, what a big topic we're getting into. I feel like Andrew set some really powerful context, but I wanted to kick off with you, Annette. Grid 2.0, this whole conversation, what does it mean to you? And when you think about it, what's the most pressing challenge that's front of mind?
Look, Grid 2.0 has to move towards the customer. You know, my career has been very customer focused, and Andrew absolutely talked about understanding that customer better. You're going to see, you know, centralization to decentralization to customers. I think the whole supply chain is going to change. I see microgrids being a big part of our future. I see, you know, the home becoming a real wonderful energy storage efficiency place with technologies like electric cars and residential energy storage. And I think there is enormous implications all around to that is very disruptive to everybody. And I think one of the previous speakers talked about utilities and how and I love Gianna because she knows where she's got to go in terms of you know, consumer demand, consumer customization, understanding where her business needs to go. And it's all going to be towards efficiency. It's going to be towards productivity. It's going to be towards innovation and technology. And you know, and love to hear about blockchain, but it's going to be about that interrelationship and really, you know, getting rid of all the layers. When I joined Home Depot in 1996, 90% of what I was doing was through the wholesale trade and layers of wholesalers. When I left, 90% was direct vendors. And so the layers are moving. We're getting rid of them. Blockchain is really accelerating that. And so enormous change, but exciting change for Canada, for the world, and for this industry.
Well, I feel like we've had a perfect introduction to Gianna in the segue there. So, Gianna, I might throw to you, and I want to put a quote to you that a lot of people have tweeted off the back of Andrew's session. He said, "There's been no innovation in the electricity grid in 100 plus years. We need to design a decentralised system that consumers can afford. It doesn't matter if the cost of electricity declines, if the cost of electricity transmission skyrockets." So I'd love your thoughts around this Grid 2.0, but maybe with that consumer lens to it.
Okay, so there was a lot of things in that one little quote, right? I mean, I think everything that Annette said, first of all, thanks for the shout out. Everything that she said, I think we really have to be prepared to transform ourselves. And actually, not be prepared. We actually need to be doing it now. It's true that electricity has, by and large, particularly around the grid, looks very similar today than it did, you know, many, many decades ago. But I think one of the things that I have come to appreciate in this industry is that the electricity sector, we're technology companies. We have deployed technology. We've gotten comfortable with it, particularly on the generation side. That's advanced pretty rapidly. And it's really that concept of making sure that we embrace the technologies, don't put our heads in the sand. I was struck by something this morning. Actually, when I was driving here, there is a big billboard down 9th Avenue, and it's about another show here that happens to be a very large petroleum show that's coming up. And the billboard said, "Our industry has changed forever. Are you adapting?" And I found myself struggling with the verb tense in this, because I thought, if the industry has already changed and you're just now thinking about whether or not you're adapting, you know, you're done. I mean, you're already so far behind. And I think the more important question is, yes, it's changed, it's changing, it's changed. Are you ahead of it? Are you thinking ahead of it? Are you investing wisely? Are you enabling it? And I think companies like ENMAX have to make sure that we don't stand in the way. And in fact, I think we have a role to play as enablers of this interface between the electricity system and the customer.
So, Boris, I want to pick up on what Gianna just said there around disruption and adaptation. What does that adaptation look like? For people sitting in the room thinking about Grid 2.0, what are some of the topics that they already need to be well advanced or thinking about how they advance their strategic conversations around?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I go into it, I want to give a shout out to Michelle sitting there and Graham. What a great first conference this is. I've never seen a conference in a very first time put on. So Graham just left, so I can't have him stand up. But exciting to be here, and yes, we're disrupting. And I really liked Michael's keynote this morning on how he put it and said it's not A or B, and I'm going to take that phrase up. It's really interesting on how we're going to move into the next space. And what I see really is that the combination and convergence of energy and transportation is really what the catalyst is, right? And we talked briefly about it before. Is that it's not just going to be energy by itself, but there's going to be so many factors that are going to play into how it's going to shape our society and the future of energy and transportation and the society as a whole, and how it pushes us really to that next level of disruption. That's where it's going to be interesting. So combining all the elements of electric vehicles, energy storage, generation, peer-to-peer trading, giving more power to the end consumer, bringing in other technologies, combining all of that together, that's really the key here. And that's, I still think is what's missing a little bit. So we were talking about opportunities before, right? That's really where we're looking at needing something to happen, because we got a lot of innovation going, right? A lot of people are putting innovation on all the buzzwords, right? Blockchain and peer-to-peer and autonomous and you name it. But there's not really people that are putting it all together and making it work. And that's what I'm excited about. So how can we really shape this and push it to Grid 0.0, 3.0, whatever number you want to call it, but really bringing all the elements together, connecting it and making it where the society has a pure benefit from it. It's not just a little piece from a technology standpoint.
Dave, we've touched on kind of the established player viewpoint in terms of adaptation and pivoting. You've come into this world as a disruptor, though. I'm interested to know about what insight catalyzed you to start Powerledger. What was the what you saw that made you go, there's an opportunity to innovate here and to get in as a nimble and agile player and do something?
It's funny, I came to this industry not as a disruptor, but as somebody from the industry. I'd spent 20 years in the network business. And the realisation I had about 3 years ago as we were running around the countryside, connecting microgrids, connecting large-scale renewables, disconnecting customers where it made sense, was that as energy storage got cheaper and cheaper, there was nothing keeping customers connected. And that if we couldn't find a reason for consumers to stay connected, then we lose the value of the grid. And I think that was the realisation for me. The big shift now I see is not necessarily a technology one. Sure, there are lots of technologies and they're changing fast, and there'll be new ones tomorrow and new ones the day after that. The change we need to see now is a cognitive one. It's about seeing where this industry is being planned and deployed from, and it's not from a traditional network space anymore. We used to sit in the middle of this thing and decide what got built where. We'd look at load and we'd figure out whether it was a generator here or a new transmission line there. The consumers are making that decision now for us. In Perth, where I'm from, 1 in 4 households has rooftop solar. Around the corner in Adelaide, it's 1 in 3. So you see that consumers really are taking the whip hand in the development of the industry, and if we can't give them the tools to create an industry that their investments aren't sympathetic with the operation of the rest of the system, then the system will come apart at the edges. So for me, the shift or the realisation wasn't anything about technology, it was about realising that the consumer now is really in the middle of this.
Boris?
Yeah, one of the exciting parts, and that's really where blockchain peer-to-peer comes also part, but energy storage plays a part, and also utilities. I think now it's the first time really that what I call it's time decoupling, right? It's the very first time in history that we time decouple generation from consumption or usage. And now it's so we have that, so we have generation, right? And then we time decouple the usage of energy, and now we put it into other elements, and that's where it gets exciting. So where are also the elements that we can, when we generate, where can we put this energy, put it into electric vehicles, trade it with our neighbors, you know, putting into demand response or other applications to help stabilize the grid and help the utilities, and that's really where it becomes exciting. So as soon as we can drive down the pricing of energy storage and other elements where it becomes really feasible, this time decoupling really pushes renewables up and really pushes electric vehicles and peer-to-peer trading up, and that's
absolutely
exciting.
Right. Not only have we decoupled generation from consumption, we've also morphed the concept of capacity. We used to talk about generating capacity or network capacity. Now it's just capacity in the system. So we've got decisions to make around how we actually build out capacity in the system, whether it's permanent capacity or mobile capacity. So you're right, all of those things we used to take for granted as an industry have changed fundamentally in the last couple of years.
When you look at the world and pockets of activity, I mean, part of what strikes me about this conversation is the level of significant pressure and fundamental change that each of you are touching on. So whose responsibility does this lie with? You know, what role does business play? What role does government play? What role do innovators play relative to established players? And where do you see this cohesively coming together? Where do we look to for best practice? Open to anyone.
I think government has a role to play, but I think business has a bigger role to play. And I am an entrepreneur, and I believe that Canada is full of entrepreneurs, and we just have to move on. We have to start really going after this business. I'm also on the board of CNRL. I came from the coal mining business. I understand fossil fuels, and 2/3 of the industry will still be relative to that. And so on the fossil fuel side and the gas side, we have got to become the lowest cost and most responsible. And there's wonderful things happening in this market, you know, in ways in which we're reducing greenhouse gases and carbon out of a barrel of oil or out of gas. You know, companies like Enlighten, Lorraine Mitchell-Moore started, Joy Romero from CNRL is doing all kinds of things. And so there's innovation here that we need to address and talk about and push on hard. But I do believe that incentives have a role to play. Government regulation has a big role to play. It's really hard to get things done in our country. I'm a proponent of the pipeline. Oh my God, we are of 35 countries, Canada is the 34th worst country to get a permit in. So we have got to get regulation streamlined, and we have to make it easier. These are things that I think government can do. Provide incentives that are tax incentive, just like we did when we built the oil sands, in the beginning. We built nuclear in the beginning. Yes, there is a role to play, but But I think we gotta step it up. And this is not one to the right issue to the left issue. It's the the 1-2 step, the AB step that Michael talked about. He said it beautifully. Look, let's get on with it. Let our entrepreneurs drive this change in our existing business, our traditional business, and the new evolving business. This is where we need to go. Canadians can do this and be leaders in this.
Boris.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with the standpoint that business needs to do it. One of the key elements, though, is we definitely need to go away from the "it's good for the environment" sales pitch, right? So yes, obviously that's a side effect of it, and it's a really good side effect. But it really needs to make economical sense to the end customer, to businesses, to utilities, and that's when the real adoption happens. And we can only get that done through innovation in business models and technology, and then working together and bringing those pieces together and collaborate on these things. Because really that's the only way that we're going to achieve this and get to the numbers that Michael presented, even just to a third of the economy to get to this point. I come from a small car company. I just recently left, as you might have heard, and I was picked up by a driver last night from the airport. My plane was delayed, and he was driving a Tesla. And he said, well, yeah, but we got to have patience, right? So the first car was made by Daimler in 1800s, and really it took 50 years before there was a lot of cars on the road. I said, yeah, but I don't want to wait that long. So how can we push this along? And that's really what our challenge is, that we can make this happen much faster and really collaborate and remove the barriers by working together, have that open dialogue, and make sure that it makes sense for everyone and not just a small subset of industries.
Gianna?
So I'll jump in. I mean, representing an established electricity company, I come from an industry and from the part of the industry that under some certain definitions, we are prime for being disrupted. We are the target. Trying, bound and determined, particularly with ENMAX, to flip that and be the one who participates in all of this disruption and who leads it. But where's the role of all these different factors? One of the things that I would point out is that I think the role of the regulators and the role of policy, it's a real challenge for them, and it's not necessarily a fault, but that those are processes, those are environments that are set up under a pretty standard process. It's slow, it takes time, and so I actually think one of the areas to unleash a lot of potential in our industry is the role of regulators to actually encourage, enable, streamline their processes, let companies let companies fail. Not hugely, but fail. You have to try to go out there. So I think the entire ecosystem of all of these different players have to work together, and I think we've got an entire industry of existing companies that are at risk for being on the sidelines, not because they don't have the ideas, not because that's not their strategic direction, not because they don't want to, it's because they're actually operating under constraints that are not of their making and that are adapting way too slow for the thinking, the opportunities, and really the consumer. Actually, the consumer expectations are changing much more rapidly than the regulatory and legislative processes that are supporting this industry.
I've got a real sympathy for regulators, I'm sorry.
I sympathize with them, I'm just saying they got to get on with it too.
But regulators don't make business models. Innovators make business models, regulators just regulate them. So it's up to people like us to actually go and make a change. And let me just flip this about a few 100,000 kilometres that way to Perth and give you a view of what the future looks like, I think the last speaker was talking about. So we have 1 in 4 households with rooftop solar now. We have load defection en masse. We have network pricing that's going through the roof right across the country. We've got large-scale typical large-scale investors who are looking at their investment paradigm going, well, hang on, how can I invest $500 million there within, I don't know whether I'm going to earn anything on that asset in 5 or 10 years' time. So we've got a massive change in the industry, and I think Perth, Western Australia is a bit of a canary in the coal mine, but we're seeing the same dynamics emerge right across the world, and that's something that Canada's going to have to look at in the next 5 to 10 years as well. But the change has got to come, is coming from a consumer-led change in the way they want to buy and sell their electricity. So when it becomes cheaper here, we're lucky in Perth in many respects. We've got lots of sunshine, we've got really expensive electricity, and I don't know how that's lucky, but we've got a really competitive solar market as well. So now it is much, much cheaper for consumers to buy and sell, to generate their own electricity than it is to buy it from the grid. When you flip over that model, you start to realise how regulators are not equipped to make that change. Network businesses need to look at how they've been allowing themselves to be regulated for the last 10 years and accepting the fact that their revenues aren't guaranteed anymore, that they're not actually monopolies anymore. They might be the only poles and wires company in the street, but they've got competition now and they can't continue as though they're a monopoly business. So the change has to come from within, you're right, and it's going to be a mixture of new business models, new consumer demand, and network businesses by and large understanding that they have to compete with these new technologies, so they have to change the way they charge for access to their grid.
No, actually, can I just jump in?
Go.
I'm actually not saying anything different than you are. I'm not trying to protect the industry. What I'm actually saying is they actually have to work together. And when we talk about the fact that this is being driven by consumers, the focal point of this entire energy sector is moving from the electricity company to the consumer, and there's new entrants, et cetera. We shouldn't keep an entire group on the sidelines. And so I'm actually totally agreeing with you.
I'd leapfrog one more generation, because 10 years ago we were saying we have to put the consumer at the centre of everything we're doing. Yeah. Now we've got to say, and change that around to say to the consumer, we need you to put us at the centre of your decision making. So when you're installing PV and batteries, when you're buying your electric car, when you're taking these steps, think about how you operate those things in a way that's sympathetic with everybody else and with the good operation of the grid. So it only sounds kind of like it's just words, but it really is the fact that the consumer is now at the beginning, at the centre of this system. They are making the investment decisions. They're making the investments themselves, and they're doing it in a way that is kind of internally focused. They're not looking at the operation of the broader system. Challenge for us is to give them an incentive to do it in a way that keeps everything together.
Absolutely. And we've become, we're model developer. We build models. We different ideas and how we move ahead. And energy storage on the grid level it's a load and it's a generator, right? And so in Canada and in Ontario, there's only one stream of revenue. But this asset can be used probably for about 8 different revenue streams. And so what we're trying to do is we finally, I think, got the ISO to recognize that there are 2 different revenue streams at least that you could use this asset for. We have got to become more efficient. We produce more generation per capita. We're the biggest wasters, I think, in all the world. I think we're worse than the United States in terms of the amount of energy, electricity we use in our country. Because we have so much. We are so lucky. We live in a country that has we haven't had a crisis. I think I hope we're getting closer to a crisis so that we can see the change. But it's all about creating, ways in which we can finance a microgrid in the north with the Indigenous communities. Looking at, we are doing, Alberta Investor, a great company, Canadian company, NRStor, building a longer duration energy storage compressed air, first fuel-free energy storage compressed air project in the world on top of a salt cavern in Goderich. The impact of this could be enormous for our country, export market, etc. We're doing, this company's doing something in Australia as well. But look, we have got to take risks, we have got to move forward, and we have to start doing things. Take the energy that is a defensive or offensive and put it into doing things. And I just really want to encourage our country to do that. Of the 100 people in the world, the best clean tech people, 13 are from Canada. 13 are from Canada. We got to scale those companies up and grow the hell out of them. That's where the future is.
Boris, I can see you egging to jump in, and I'll let you, but I want to ask you a separate question to flow into.
We're putting you out of a job, right?
I want to ask you, where do you see the convergence of transport and energy heading, and how do you think that'll have a positive impact on the grid of the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And good segue, and thank you for doing your job. Maybe keep us on track a little bit.
I'll take it.
Otherwise, we're just rambling on amongst us here on stage, and you might get bored and go to the bar. But anyway, so one of the key things, and it's what was mentioned here, is that we're really going to put more power into the individual's way, right? So we're really looking at making energy and transportation really more of a distributed factor where it's shared, it's the individual generation, it's the individual storage. I can overproduce because I have the space on my roof, or I can store because I have the means to put energy storage in. But let's not look at it on an individual basis, but I can share it now with my neighbors, with someone else that lives in an apartment complex that can't put solar, that maybe doesn't have the financial means or rents, and that's what's exciting. And now you mix in the future of transportation, which will be electric, hopefully, to a very large extent. And one of the things I did at a previous panel, I spoke in Vancouver a couple months ago, when you look at the forecast of the global energy stationary storage market in 2024, that translates about to 60,000 vehicles on the road. That's not a lot. Tesla and Nissan, just by itself, the number 2 vehicles on the road, just put out that number last year. So that is already happening. That meaning the amount of capacity that I will be driving around on the road will be outstanding. And the effect of that is going to be tremendous. And we talked about it before the panel previously, where we're really looking at how can you make the vehicle an asset on the grid. A lot of car companies are going to tell you, well, we can't cycle the battery much more, right? Because it's going to depreciate out of warranty. We can't use that on the road. However, now we really understand batteries. We can exactly identify if I only drive 10 miles to work every day, and that's what I use the car for, that battery is heavily underutilized, and I can use that for grid service and other aspects of it. If there's a lead foot in Perth, maybe, and he's driving around to the fullest extent, and there's no speed limits and cops are non-existent, that battery you don't want to use for anything but in the car, because it's probably not going to outlast the car. So but we have that technology and that kind of information already available in the vehicle. So we can then make it a voluntary opt-in for the drivers, where we can say, hey, we see your battery is a prime candidate, your car is a prime candidate to be utilized as a grid asset. Would you like to participate? And we can guarantee you now you come in $20 a month, whatever it might be, and that's where the real value comes in. Now you're going to get these people participating. And just to close that off, in the future, just think of what I mentioned with you, 60,000 cars, and that's going to meet the forecasted energy storage demand in 2024. 2030, we're going to have all these car batteries coming back, and they're still at 70% of its capacity. That meaning 2030, the battery and energy storage should be almost zero. That means the cost of energy storage at that time will be tremendously low, where we can then really utilize renewable energies, pushing them into batteries. We can even create seasonal storage if needed to be, which we looked at from Michael earlier in the presentation. And those are these are the problems that we're solving. Just by 2024, Daimler was predicted to put out twice the capacity of the global energy storage market. And it's still a relatively small car company compared to all the others. If you look at Toyota, you look at Volkswagen, you look at all those Nissan, those big, gigantic car companies that are out there, it's going to be a huge capacity on the grid, on the road, which we can utilize for energy and transportation and bringing that together. So that's really exciting.
Dave, I want to jump to you if I can. I know you mentioned that your work is consumer-led as opposed to being technology-led, but I want to touch on the role of technology in the future of how this plays out, specifically blockchain, which I know you're leveraging at the moment with what you're doing. How does that open up new opportunity when it comes to things like microgeneration, peer-to-peer, energy trading? What role does that play in Grid 2.0?
What it allows is the realisation of the value of those assets. So when we talk about cars discharging to the grid, now we're only thinking about the cost of the electricity that's coming out of that grid, not the value of the capacity that that car actually represents. Using a technology like blockchain will allow us to monetize that capacity in a way we can't do now, in a way that would, if we tried to, would be administratively really difficult and expensive. But blockchain allows us to strip out a lot of the layers you talked about earlier, to put the consumer directly in touch with the demand. So the consumer directly in touch with the grid company, or the consumer directly in touch with another consumer, so that we can make those transactions really fast, really simple, really low cost, really secure, and really beneficial to both parties.
And now that I don't have to adhere to corporate policy, so I can give them business ideas. I mean, the exciting part is really, when you look at that, imagine you have solar and you have a really large roof and you can overproduce solar energy, right? And you have these credits that are sitting there. What if I have an electric vehicle and through blockchain transactions, I can make that charging station, wherever that is, available and use my credits that I produced at home? Or if Frank, Joe, Suzanne, whoever overproduced, they can share their credits with me so I can charge on the road. at that low rate that they produced, right? We saw figures of 6 cents, 8 cents, right? Residential solar at the moment, we can build in California. I'm not sure how it is in Calgary, but I know Germany a little bit. But you can get up to 8 cents, 10 cents a kilowatt hour on residential solar and generated electricity. Perth is probably even cheaper. And that's where it becomes really, that's probably a lot less than what you're currently paying in your electricity bill. And when you can transfer that to your car, beautiful. So that's your business right there.
That's exactly this, and not just the electricity. So at the moment, if you want to participate in low carbon fuel substitution credit programs, you need to own a bus fleet, or you need to be a major transport company. But you use a technology like blockchain that allows you to strip out those administrative layers. You can get consumers participating in those programs, so you make them more broadly available. So you add another value stream to the ownership of an electric vehicle, another incentive to buy one, another incentive to use one, or another incentive to charge one.
But as this transition happens, so Gianna and I are working with the existing utilities, right? There is investments that have been made. There is, lots of talk about stranded assets. This transition is not easy. It really is not easy. Big advantage in Canada is that we haven't invested much in our infrastructure. You may be different, but quite frankly, haven't invested a lot in our infrastructure. And so as we make these decisions to build more poles and wires, should we be thinking about microgrids? Should we be thinking about a different approach to supply that energy, create that energy in that community? Really take a look at what communities want to do. We're talking to communities in Alberta today that are significantly sized communities that are saying, look, we want to control. We want to take greater control over our energy. Help us, energy storage, do this. And so it is happening everywhere, but it is a challenge. And so that to me is something that, there's going to be a transition. We have to recognize that it's going to happen, and we have to come out the other side. The best will win. The people that are most profitable and responsible will win in the end, in all sectors, in my opinion.
So one of the things I want to ask is, a lot of you have mentioned this line repeatedly around, we need to move on. We need to get on with it. We need to be moving faster. We need to be innovating. We need to be thinking about how we remove barriers. 1,500 leaders from across certainly Canada and leaders throughout the world in this space. What is it that they can be doing from a pragmatic call to action? What would you like to encourage them to be doing when it comes to advancing Grid 2.0?
Investment in the space. I mean, it's one of the things that I'm personally looking. So if you want to give me money to invest, feel free. But,
personal plug there.
But anyway, just joking aside, it's really something where to deliver this key technology, we need the investment into the space from the incumbents, right? So the Shells of the world, and they're doing it. All these companies are really pushing money into the space. And for the utilities to participate, for the incumbents to participate, for the grid operators, the ICOs to participate, we really need that funding to funnel into this space to push this technology further and make the adoption. Because the biggest issue, and I see it coming from an incumbent car company, is the market size is not there right now, right? So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. How do you bring this to market if you can't make money in that? Because the market size is not quite there, but you can't grow the market size if you don't have all the tools available to really have this seamless customer experience. And that's what we need to create. And you can only do that by getting enough funding into this space with people that have the vision, the understanding, and hopefully they get enlightened here to really open their wallets and fund that period until we get through this time of low adoption, and that's really when we can make it happen. And one more thing I forgot earlier, which is going to be quite interesting, the autonomous side of things, right? If we had this on the previous panel with Roger and Luca, and we're really looking at autonomous vehicles. Once these cars drive around by themselves, they're distributed as assets which you can steer on where you want them on the grid. It's basically a movable energy storage space that can be utilized for that in underutilized spaces when they're not driving people or packages or any other aspects. And it's, but it needs funding to really bring that to fruition, and that's what I see.
Gianna, what would be your ask, aside from funding? If we
okay, that was my answer, so I'm sitting here trying to come up with another one. No, that's all right. What can anyone do? I think, first of all, to everyone here, whether you're a business leader or you work in a government or whatever your role is, you're also a consumer. So you are the customer. So I think that it's really important that if you're here, you're interested in this topic, you're educated, but I think spreading the word and helping demystify this too, to everyone that we know, is that we are going through all of this change. Embrace it. As a customer, be informed. I think one of the things I always encourage people to do is, just because you have a lot of information doesn't necessarily mean you're informed. I mean, stay informed, understand it, understand what the trade-offs may be and what the opportunities are. And when companies who come and say, this is what we want to invest in, support that as well, and recognize that there is a cost to transition, but I'm a huge believer, if we get it right, we can have the and. We can make this transition, we can embrace these new technologies, and we can do it in a way that brings it through a low cost. If we aren't thoughtful and we knee-jerk and we come up with 1,000 policies that are not interconnected in any way, well, then we are at risk for doing it in a wasteful manner. So as consumers, have your voice be heard, engage in it, bring a friend, and support these investments that companies are making, and support the companies that are making these investments.
So Annette, we've had funding, be an engaged consumer. What would you add to the list?
Those of you, I think Canada's future is in innovation, diversity. It's so good. Gianna and I commented, it's so good to see the women in this room. The 13 clean tech people in the best in the world are all men. We have to make this 26, right? We have to change this scenario. And my career, I've been in many, many industries. Men and women working together in a diverse environment creates such great innovation. And so, look, my whole life, I go to 60% figuring out what company I'm going to start, what area I'm going to invest in, where I'm going to go. I get to 60% and then I go. We got to stop talking about going. We got to go. We got to move quicker. We have to write our decisions on the way back. And we have to, I just don't see a lot of risk in where the future's going. We talk a lot about that. We know Michael's presentation was terrific today. It's going in that direction. And why do we want, the energy capital of the world, why are we going to let that go with a transition in this industry? I remember opening 26 stores in this province. You guys are the best. You opened the stores the fastest. The first LEED building in all of Canada was built here in Calgary. You get it. But let's just go ahead and move it more quickly. We're losing ground, and let's stop talking about it and let's move ahead.
So funding, be an engaged consumer, harness diversity, and move quicker. Dave, bring us home.
Move slower. If I'm a utility business, I'm making investments of 40 or 50 years, because that's what I've always done. And those investments are going to be stranded inside the next 10. So network utility businesses need to stop thinking about building and owning and start thinking about enabling. Right. So we need to think about enabling investments that are smaller scale, less risky, made by consumers themselves that aren't at risk of being stranded. We need to slow down in order to speed up, to sit back and get the regulatory frameworks right, but allow the consumers to make the decisions they need to make. Smart grid technology has been around for, 15 or 20 years, but they haven't emerged because they're just too expensive, and the incremental benefit we get from installing them just isn't worth the risk. But consumers are making those investments now. Let's let them, but let's turn them into truly smart grids by creating the enabling interconnections, the policies, the technology interconnections that allow those investments to make sense for the consumers themselves and for the grid more broadly.
Brilliant. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is all we've got time for in this session. I feel like we could comfortably keep this panel going for another hour, so we might continue that over our lunch conversation. But can you join with me in thanking our panellists, Dave, Gianna, Boris and Annette,